Welcome to the second Course Design 101 video. Today's video, we will be taking a look at learning outcomes. If you happen to watch the last video, the previous video on backwards course design, and you wrote down some notes about what you hope your students will be able to do, to know, and to value by the end of your course, I would highly recommend taking out those notes now, because you can use those notes to help you create some new learning outcomes with today's video. So our learning outcome for today's video is that you will be able to create transparent learning outcomes. So by the end of this video, you should be able to write or create a transparent learning outcome for your course. I think it's worth saying that it takes some time and some practice to really write time and practice to create transparent learning outcomes. When you create learning outcomes, it is not a one and done process. It's a very iterative process. Sometimes it can be very helpful to share your learning outcomes with your colleagues, with someone else in your department, to get some feedback on what might not be incredibly clear. So let's go ahead and jump into today's video. So the first thing you can do with your learning outcomes is take a look at your current learning outcomes and reflect on your own learning outcomes right now as they stand. You want to make sure that your learning outcomes incorporate significant and relevant learning. So below, there's a list of a few different ways that we can take a look at significant and relevant learning. So you want to make sure your learning outcomes include some aspect of understanding or remembering any key concepts, terms, or relationships. Also, the students should be able to know how to use the content, right? So connecting the how and the why. You also want your students to be able to relate this subject to their other subjects or classes. Students should be able to understand the personal and social implications of whatever course they're taking. Also, it's important for students to value the subject. And this really promotes students to be able to become lifelong learners, right? If they really value the subject, they want to learn more about it, that will be very helpful for them as well. And also, it's really important to think about, in the same vein of lifelong learning, know how to keep on learning about the subject after the course is over. And a really good piece of advice would be to think about your objectives on a macro and a micro level. So the macro level would be the kind of semester or course level, right? So what should the students be able to do by the end of the course or throughout the course? And then the micro unit level learning outcomes, these are more of your specific learning outcomes for an activity, for a lecture, something like that. So it's really important to keep in mind, what are the overarching learning outcomes, right? The macro learning outcomes, and what are the smaller micro or unit level learning outcomes. And a lot of times these micro unit level outcomes, these will kind of be almost like the stepping stones for your students to reach those bigger, more overarching learning outcomes. So now, in order to write clear and transparent learning outcomes, we recommend taking a look at Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy is a really, really helpful way to begin to write learning outcomes. Now, there are certainly other taxonomies or other ways you can conceptualize writing learning outcomes, but this is simply a very clear way to write your learning outcomes. So here, if we take a look at the Bloom's pyramid here, we have these different categories of remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And this pyramid, there is a purpose for the pyramid. The skills that fall lower on the pyramid tend to be a bit lower in terms of cognitive load, in terms of skill level. So simply being able to remember or copy something is certainly a much different cognitive skill set than being able to adapt or categorize or construct something, right? Which would fall under the create category. And it's really important to think about all of these different levels of the taxonomy and how you can incorporate different levels in your course. You don't want to only focus on the remember or understanding portions of the learning outcomes. It's also important to kind of bring your students up higher through their skill levels and their skill set and have them do some things where they might have to apply, right? They apply the knowledge. They might have to analyze it, right? So really take a look at something and put it more into meaningful parts and find the connections with those. Then also evaluating. So having some type of conclusion after having some standards or criteria. And then lastly, if you're a fan of project-based learning, for example, the creation obviously will be a big part of your learning outcomes as well, because if you have your students create a project or develop something, then they would also be reaching this higher level of the Bloom's taxonomy. So this taxonomy can be used in a lot of different ways to simply help you write out your learning outcomes. So feel free to use this taxonomy as kind of a springboard to help you write more clear and transparent learning outcomes. So now let's take a look at an example of two different learning outcomes. So A, the learning outcome is understand the process to conduct basic tests to characterize biomaterials. Our second learning outcome, outcome B, is describe the process to conduct basic tests to characterize biomaterials. So you can go ahead and pause this video for a moment and think about which learning outcome, in your opinion, is a better learning outcome and why. So take a moment and think about which learning outcome do you find more transparent and why is that? All right. So I hope you have had some time to think about these two learning outcomes and decide which one is the more transparent learning outcome. So I would say that our learning outcome B, describe the process to conduct basic tests to characterize biomaterials, is much more transparent because how do we really measure our students' understanding, right? Understand this as a verb to begin our learning outcome. It's kind of difficult to really, how can your students prove that they understand something, right? Now, a way they could prove maybe they understand something would be by describing it, right? So this is a much more clear learning outcome. You can also think about a learning outcome as one way to take a look at a learning outcome would be it's a goal that you want your students to reach, and they can use numerous different activities to reach that outcome. So for example, to describe the process, you could have your students draw a picture. You could have them make an outline. You could have them write out specific steps. There are many different activities that your students could do to show their knowledge and show that they are able to describe the process to conduct basic tests to characterize biomaterials. So I hope this has been a helpful video for you on writing transparent learning outcomes. If you have any questions about your own learning outcomes, feel free to send us an email at otl@wayne.edu. You can also reach us by phone at 313-577-0001. And we would certainly be happy to meet with you and discuss your learning outcomes. And just to reiterate again, writing your learning outcomes, especially writing more transparent learning outcomes, takes a lot of time, a lot of practice. So don't be afraid if your first round, they aren't quite as transparent as you would like. It's a very iterative process and it takes time. So tune in to our next video where we will be discussing how to align assessments and content with your learning outcomes. Thank you for watching.